Matt Whitaker, former U.S. Acting Attorney General.
This is such a great conversation about America, our future, what's going to save our republic.
We have a great football player. Matt Whitaker is here. Matt.
They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed.
It's a touchdown, Whitaker.
Former acting U.S. Attorney General.
Under President Trump.
I'm going to be an unwavering supporter of law enforcement.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice with your host, Matt Whitaker.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. We are lucky today to have really an extraordinary man and a great American, Dr. Ben Carson. Doctor, how are you?
I am doing very well. It's always good to be with you.
Oftentimes I have more obscure people on my show, and I feel like you're somebody that doesn't need an introduction, but your life has been extraordinary. You had this very successful, preeminent practice as a doctor, as a world famous neurosurgeon, and for some reason you decided to get into the great game of politics and move on. You ran for president in 2016 and ultimately became the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So it's an impressive resume. I assume that if you were looking for a job, you would not have a hard time finding one. But now you have the American Cornerstone Institute, with which you are doing a lot of important work. So let's start there. Tell me about what you're working on at American Cornerstone Institute.
Well, my intention after the 2020 election was to retire. I failed the first time in my retirement attempt. So I said, this time I'm going to succeed. But the fact of the matter is, watching the direction that the country was moving in very rapidly after the 2020 election, I said I would not enjoy myself out on the golf course or cruising around the world, recognizing what was happening to our country. So some very talented folks who worked with me at HUD joined me in forming the American Cornerstone Institute, which looks at those cornerstone principles that made America great. Our faith, which is so important, our Judeo-Christian values, which teach us to love your neighbor, not to cancel your neighbor, not to hate your neighbor, not to try to create havoc in their lives. And then liberty. This is the beacon of liberty. Even today, with all the horrible things that people are saying about the United States, you see people coming in here in droves, legally and illegally, just trying to get here. So that tells you that obviously this is that beacon, that's still that city on the hill, but we have to fight very hard to make sure that we maintain that.
Yeah.
And then the community, such an important concept. Early on in the development of our nation, there were a lot of little communities that were isolated from everybody else, 100 miles to the next town. Not only did they survive, but they thrived because they knew how to work together. Despite, having different beliefs, they were able to go beyond that and look at what was good for everybody. And that has always been one of the major strengths of America and why we're in so much danger today as we allow the purveyors of hatred and division to prevail. And then life, they're having a big march in Washington, march. From the womb to the tomb, we need to be concerned not only about the existence of people, but the quality of existence for people. So, that's the basis of it. And then we have a pediatric component called Little Patriots, recognizing that the progressive movement is making every attempt to indoctrinate the kids early on. Vladimir Lenin said, give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted. They know what they're doing. And we have to be every bit as vigilant, if not more active, in making sure that we teach our children the right things. And that's what we do with the Little Patriots program, littlepatriotslearning.com. Free of charge, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But an honest look at our history, you'll see there's a lot more good than there is bad and ugly. And we have to build on those positive things and not build on just the negative things like critical race theory and 1619 project. Right.
And I think as I've traveled around, my home state of Iowa and around I am always recalling really the founding fathers' challenge to future generations. And that is to form a more perfect union. And I think all the things you just described are ways that we can continue to move towards. We'll never be perfect. Only God is perfect. Okay. But we will work together in our communities, in our families, and try to form a more perfect union. And, like you said, I mean, the history of America is certainly not one great line. We have made all sorts of, horrifying mistakes. And
like all
trying to correct those.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fascinating that that many of the left will just take something like slavery and try to make it seem like it's something that's unique to the United States.
Right.
When in fact, every society, since there's a written history, has had to deal with it. And the thing that makes us different is that we had a large number of people who were willing to fight and give their lives to stop it. And that's what we need to be teaching our kids, that even if evil exists, there is a way to eradicate it, but you have to be courageous, you have to be willing to stand up. And, that's the case today too, as people basically are trying to change our country into something else. It was unique. No one thought it would work. The Europeans laughed at us. Can't have a country that's run on the will of the people. You have to have a monarch. You have to have a ruling body. But it's worked for 240 years and will continue to work. But we have to be courageous and we have to be willing to stand up. And that's what Benjamin Franklin meant when he came out of Constitution Hall in 1787 and he was asked, "What do we have here, sir? A monarchy or a republic?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it."
If you can keep it. Well, I think one of the keys to our success as a country, and you exemplify it, and I'm not even going to humbly submit that but I think we both represent this idea of the citizen servant, somebody that has a regular life, has a profession. You're a doctor, I'm a lawyer. We were in private practice. We were kind of just in the economy, just, being, contributing, paying our taxes. And then, for a limited time, we serve, our country and we, give up the conveniences of being a private citizen and go into an administration. But then we leave, ultimately it ends and you go back to the real world and you live, like I like to say, live under the laws of that you passed or enforced in my case. And I think one of the challenges we've moved away from is we have a professional class, not only of bureaucrats, but of career politicians. And unfortunately, unlike everybody up until FDR, they didn't just serve their 2 terms. George Washington's greatest act as president was to resign after 2 terms. FDR didn't get the memo, and so they had to change the Constitution. But I think it's so important that these folks are not often, they believe it, but they're not anointed by God to be legislators or, bureaucrats. Quite frankly, there's others that may bring fresh ideas and fresh perspective. I would like to see a movement back to this idea of the citizen servant.
Well, I hope people also recognize that the way our country was designed, it was supposed to be run on the will of the people, not on the will of a bunch of bureaucrats. And yet, what are we seeing? Ever-growing government invading every aspect of our lives, wanting to control your life from the womb to the tomb. And that is the major fight that we're in right now. Do we change to another system like so many other countries in the world that are not doing anywhere near as well as we are, quite frankly? Since the advent of this country, there have been more life-changing inventions than throughout the rest of the history of the world. And in the last 110 years, 90% of major inventions come from this country. Why is that? It's because we've created an environment that is conducive to creation with entrepreneurship and innovation, encouraging those things. And as we begin to be more and more regulated, those things will start to die down. You can't be innovative if there's somebody cracking the whip every step you take and saying, no, you got to do it this way. Mm-hmm. Mandating this and mandating that. Mandates are not for a free country. That's for a country that's run by a ruler. And that's why so many of the people who want to fundamentally change us cling with everything they have to COVID and to the mandates associated with that. They don't want to give it up. They love it.
I read something interesting this last week talking about how, it was in the context of the whole AI and chat GPT and this idea that, sort of these computers are as smart as human beings. And its point was that what the regurgitating facts like an AI right now, like this chat GPT, involves no creativity. And I think probably you would agree with me because your medical practice, quite frankly, exhibited some creativity. You were doing things that really hadn't been done before. And isn't that where we ended up with these bureaucrats during COVID, is there was no creativity? They were just like, they were leaning on facts, but they weren't like thinking through, be willing to take risk or take a step out. They were just sort of going through the traditional dogma of I guess epidemiology and all. And so to boil that down, as a medical doctor, do you see that in these, these like public health officials that they know a lot of facts, have no creativity or quite frankly boldness to address these once in a lifetime, epidemics?
Yeah. Well, I've been very saddened to see what's happened to the medical profession because many people used to go into medicine with a heart to serve and to help people.
Yeah.
And now we have people who just, like everybody else almost in society, particularly what they're teaching in our universities, you have to conform. You have to believe this. And if you don't believe that, you're a horrible person. I was struck, I guess it was this past spring at the University of Michigan, where the students walked out of their white coat ceremony, the first year med students, because the speaker was pro-life. The topic that she spoke about had nothing to do with pro-life.
Yeah.
But they couldn't stand to be in the room with such a person. Now, how in the world can you be a physician if you can't stand to be in the room with somebody who has a different opinion than you do? And this is what we're allowing to occur in our society, and it's having an extremely deleterious effect. And I do see more and more people starting to exhibit a little bit of courage, and that is very promising to me. Because as you know, you can't be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave. And if you're not willing to stand up for what you believe in, you're going to lose it. And freedom is not free. You got to fight for it every day.
And I'm amazed at how many indoctrinated youth that have been told, taught a certain worldview, never had to defend it, never had to argue, sort of the counterpoint, and how they lack any ability to actually explain or defend what they believe in, why they think, socialism or socialized medicine or, a strong central government is somehow better compared to, the system that we've attempted to build here. I mean, it's, imperfect as we know, but
they don't really know.
Extraordinary.
They don't really have the ability to explain it. And what I always encourage people to do is engage them in a conversation. Don't cast aspersions, don't be mean and nasty, but just say, can you explain to me exactly why that is better than this? They very quickly run out of explanations.
Right.
And if you press them, then they start calling you names and they walk away. I mean,
Yeah.
because they can't explain it. It's unexplainable. It's not logical. It makes no sense.
You're right. You're right. And it's, I don't know. We can get, I've always, I call for more statesmen and like any time I possibly can, because I think our political rhetoric is not elevated. I'm sure you would agree with me. I think you're somebody that has always tried to elevate the political rhetoric, deal in a certain set of facts that are incontrovertible, but then, sort of advance an argument as to why, your worldview is better. And so I think we need certainly more people like you that are, continuing to be involved in the debate of the future of our country, because I think it's tenuous. I'd love to hear your perspective on, I went around the country in 2020 saying, the future of our republic depends on this election. I think we're seeing obviously the fruits of the wrong choice, but are we at the end of the republic? Are we at the 250 years that mark most great empires, or can we still be saved?
Well, that's a question that I hear a lot of people asking these days. And a lot of people have become very discouraged. And they just think, okay, we've had our day in the sun and it's time to go back into the hole. But I don't believe that, actually. It's always darkest before the dawn.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it has to be pretty dark before people can see the light. I think we're about there now. I mean, look at what's happening in this country, how the FBI is being used to persecute political opponents. I mean, that's the hallmark of totalitarianism. And it's just creeped right in, right under our noses, without a lot of people even recognizing the implications of what something like that means. And, the fact that, we don't seem to understand that you have to have safe borders to have sovereignty as a country. How can you just let any and everybody into your country, particularly knowing that there are countries in this world who want to destroy us? Why wouldn't they send their operatives to that opening? And then the fentanyl, the human trafficking, the letting loose of career criminals to wreak havoc upon our society.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's almost, I hate to say it, it's almost as if someone has set out to destroy our country.
Yeah. I know the main suspects. It is the people's, the Communist Party in China and their leaders. Certainly, the more they can destabilize the United States of America, the sooner they can reach their goal, which is to be the dominant world superpower and then change the entire world order, whether that's the reserve currency, whether that's, all of the institutions that have been built really by the United States and its allies to, protect our franchise is a little callous because it's more than that. Really, it's to protect Western civilization and its uniqueness in human history.
And, the debt that we are creating for those who come after us is unsustainable.
Yeah.
Most people don't even have a concept of what we're doing here. Trillions of dollars, 31 trillion, approaching $32 trillion in debt. To count to a trillion, one number per second, which you can't even do because it takes longer than that to pronounce the numbers when you get into the big numbers. But if you could, to count to 1 trillion, it would take over 53,000 years.
Wow.
That's just for one.
How long does it take to count to 31.4 trillion?
Think about it. It's pretty amazing. And yet we're just running that debt up. And what if we do lose our status as the reserve currency?
Mm.
And China takes over? What is going to be the implication? we're going to be like Argentina.
Yeah. No, it's catastrophic.
Yeah. All of this is in our hands. And if we're smart enough and we know history and we can see where we need to make the turn, we can still salvage things. But if we just stick our heads in the sand and just let things continue this way, I'm afraid the answer is not going to be a good one for us.
Yeah. And that's why patriots like you continue to fight. In fact, one of the interesting facts is I think it's certainly a majority of all $100 bills that have been printed, but it might be close to 80% of the hard currency is held outside of the United States. Because the rest of the world obviously believes that, the U.S. currency is as valuable a currency as you can have. And they, again, they trust, the policymakers and the Federal Reserve and all the people, that stand behind the full faith and credit of that reserve note. But it's, we got to start making better choices, to your point.
It's being compromised significantly. And, by raising the debt to these levels, it's hard for me to believe that our Congress people don't understand the implications of that. Mm-hmm. But if you can raise it to such an astronomical level, then you can justify massive increases in taxes, redistribution of wealth, mm-hmm. and complete dependence on the government, which is what socialist Marxist governments love. And they're just moving us toward that. And we're just sort of like going along with it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that disturbs me the most. And that's why we have to be out here. We have to be proclaiming the truth, recognizing that there'll be consequences, that people will try to cancel you, people will try to hurt you, people will try to hurt your family. Mm-hmm. Just a couple of weeks ago, the January 6th committee put all out our public information, personal identifiable information. I've already had a number of consequences from that, but you just keep fighting. We have to fight for our country. And like I said before, I wouldn't be comfortable just sitting back and relaxing and enjoying life.
It's a good point. Such a good point. And I'm in the same boat. I just think that it is the calling of our time is to save our republic, is to save the United States of America, to make sure that future generations can enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy, even if they're under attack and more than attack, assault.
And I want to thank you for the time that you were acting Attorney General, for the way that you carried things out and help restore some trust.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You mentioned the FBI, and I just have to say this because it's so true. Is the left accuses us of the things that they are doing, and I worked so hard during my time at the Department of Justice, both as Chief of Staff and ultimately as Acting Attorney General, to defend the rule of law, to make sure that justice was blind, and to where I could have been a partisan and put my thumb on the scale, actually didn't, even though I was being accused of doing that exact thing. And now I look at how Merrick Garland does business, and that's exactly what he's doing all day, every day. And it's it is, and it's because the media won't cover it and won't cover it the same way, and won't accuse their administration of the behaviors that they actually do. And instead, they accuse us of what we don't do. It's so frustrating to watch, and
it's fascinating. It's fascinating that the media doesn't recognize that they're preparing their own grave, because what totalitarian governments do is they control the media. That's the first thing that they do.
Yep.
So they will have lost all of their independence, and they're helping to facilitate that.
Yeah, but this is what they want, and it's to the I guess I don't actually understand their motivation. I don't understand, because most of those media organizations are capitalists. I mean, they're trying to make money, but they've employed so many ideologues and left wingers that they're sort of being pulled that way, even if it's not in their best interests. What do while we got a minute, I just something on my mind, and I know that probably, both of us are affected by it, but do you have any thoughts on the whole ESG movement and whether or not the SEC and the government should force companies to consider other value propositions other than just maximizing shareholder value? I mean, is I think it just puts kind of the whole kind of corporate structure on its head, and it's going to have all sorts of perverse outcomes.
Well, it distorts the fundamental principles of capitalism, quite frankly. The companies are there for a reason, and they become public for a reason, and it's to increase shareholder value. It's not to engage in social engineering.
Mm-hmm.
There are other organizations that do that, and it does confuse things tremendously. And I've been on multiple corporate boards. I sit on several now, and I look at how much time has to be devoted, to the ESG interest, as opposed to concentrating on how to increase share owner value. And it's just like so many other things in our society today, a lot of stuff doesn't make sense, right? Because we're trying to insinuate ourselves into every aspect of life. That was not what America was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a place where people can live the life that they want to live, as long as they're not adversely impacting someone else. And that's where your freedom ends, when you start impacting other people. But other than that, live and let live, and benefit or don't, depending on what you do. But everybody else isn't responsible for what you do. You're responsible for what you do.
Mm-hmm.
We need to bring that sense of personal responsibility back to people and stop trying to manage every aspect of their lives.
Yeah. So your personal story, as I mentioned at the beginning, is amazing. And, it's been well documented, kind of how you grew up and how you found your way to becoming one of the preeminent neurosurgeons in our country, if not the preeminent neurosurgeon in our country. And what are the systems in place? And I mean this not from a government structure, but just from a nurturing talent. Do you think we have our country in place so that the next Dr. Ben Carson, that it doesn't, grow up in Greenwich to wealthy family? Is there a way that's going to funnel them into their full potential, or are we leaving talented youth behind just because of their socioeconomic circumstances?
Well, there's no question that we're leaving some of them behind, but that should encourage those of us who recognize what's going on to work even harder, to present examples. They don't, the left, the hard left, they don't like people like me, because it kind of bursts their bubble when it comes to convincing people that they're victims and that they're not going to be able to succeed. They don't like those stories anymore. They used to be okay with those stories, but
yeah,
not anymore. But we have to proclaim them loudly and clearly, and we have to do things that encourage people. That's why, we do the Little Patriots. That's why we have the Carson Scholars Fund, which is all over the country now, and recognizes those students who achieve at the highest academic levels, but who also manifest humanitarian qualities, that they care about other people.
Good.
And we just have to do everything we can to continue to fight the scourge, which is trying to change us into something else.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. When did you when did you realize you were a conservative? Was it an aha moment, or just sort of that's where you've always been, and so it
No,
just
it was,
came
it
natural?
was aha, because I grew up in Detroit, very liberal, Boston, very liberal, went to college in New Haven, very liberal, medical school in Ann Arbor, very liberal, came to Baltimore, very liberal. So I was a liberal. And then I did something a liberal not supposed to do. I listened to a conservative who happened to be Ronald Reagan. And I said, he sounds just like my mother. He says the same things that she says. And that's when I kind of realized where I should be coming from. And I also saw so many patients who were perfectly fine and capable, but they had become dependent upon the system and upon the government. I said, we're not doing these people any favors.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I think this is probably a good place to end this conversation. I guess might break a little news today that I'm going to do some work with you at American Cornerstone Institute, and
yeah, we're looking forward to
that.
having you as one of the fellows and listening to the great wisdom that you've exhibited over the years.
Well, I'm not an expert on everything, but I know I have some experience that helps me, have some knowledge on a few important pieces, especially the Department of Justice, where, I've spent 7.5 years at the Department of Justice. It's an institution that's the only department or branch of the government that is named after a virtue and not a function. And so
that's true.
Obviously, to do justice, to wear the white hat every day, to, know that justice is blind. These are the ideals, in our constitutional framework and defending the rule of law that I, have direct experience. And I look forward to collaborating with you, a great American patriot, Dr. Carson. So,
well, we are delighted to have you, and thank you for being a patriot, because we're going to get our country back. We're going to save it. It's going to take some work, but we are going to save it. There's a lot of people out there waking up. We just encourage them to be courageous, be willing to stand up for what you believe. Don't stand in the corner looking at your shoes.
Well, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and join you. So thank you for being on Liberty and Justice. This is a special episode having you on here, and I look forward